Hey, my name is Sam and I'm a realtor in Spokane, Washington. And in this video, we're going to talk about the cost of living in Spokane in comparison to other cities throughout the United States. If you like the video, feel free to subscribe. And I would love for you to like and comment below. I would love your opinions and tell me what you think about what I got to say today in regards to the video. And if you have any more questions in regarding housing in the Spokane market, and how maybe you should navigate the market here in Spokane, feel free to set up an appointment with me in my profile above. But let's check out the video. Like I said earlier in this video, we're going to talk about the cost of living in Spokane in comparison to some major cities all throughout the United States. And the first one we're going to talk about is Seattle, Washington. This one I chose to start out first because a lot of people in Seattle have been to Spokane and a lot of people in Spokane have been to Seattle. So I thought it would be a good one to start out with. And so let's take a look at if you made $70,000, and that's kind of what we're going to do for the baseline, kind of for every city we look at. What would that look like in comparison to Spokane, and how much would you have to make in Spokane to equal what $70,000 would be in the other cities we're going to talk about. So in Seattle, if you make $70,000, you would only need to make $48,000 in Spokane to continue the same cost of living and lifestyle. So that is 43% lower, which is very substantial. And let's go ahead and take a look at specifically what those break down into. So housing cost is going to be 57% lower in Spokane, and I would definitely agree with that. The home price in Seattle saying is just over 1 million and just under 500,000 here in Spokane. I think Spokane actually has a little more diverse of a market where you have some lower cost homes that are closer to $300,000 or maybe lower than that, and quite the variety on the higher end as well. And I think Seattle, the baseline kind of high price point there's not a lot of wiggle room down, in my experience. So, but anyways, I do understand these are averages, and so that is what we're looking at. But let's go to the rent, and the rent would be $3,400 or $3,300 in Seattle and about $1,200 in Spokane. And I think in regards to the rent in Spokane, I can't speak specifically to Seattle because I haven't rented there, but it really depends on where you're renting, and the same can go for the cost of the home in Spokane. It depends on where you're buying. There's a lot of very, very different price points throughout the Spokane market, and it kind of falls right in line with the rent as well. So I know that a couple of years ago, I was renting out in Liberty Lake, which is just outside of Spokane, and that was a 2-bedroom, but it was just over $2,000 a month, and it was a really nice complex. And so I do understand it was a 2-bedroom, but I think the 1-bedrooms were about $1,500 to $1,600 a month. So it really does depend, but I do think that this stat here is going off of what it would be like for a 1-bedroom, which is pretty fair. So the energy looks like it's about the same, phone bill. Nobody's really using landlines anymore. So this is in regards to cell phones, and it's the same as well, but that's pretty standard, I would assume, throughout the video that we go from place to place. And let's take a look at the transportation. Obviously, the lower gas prices are a big plus. I would say if you're commuting, or not commuting, but if you're going to visit Seattle, maybe going to catch an M's game, you definitely want to fill up on this side of the state before you get over to Seattle. But if you are Seattle and maybe you think you could make it over the pass to Ellensburg before you need to fill up, I recommend that because the gas typically is cheaper right there when you get over the mountains. So healthcare, this is a big one. I know a lot of people, this is something they really want to lock in on and pay attention to. And in Seattle, it looks like it's about 40% more per doctor visit. And overall, the healthcare is 19% cheaper here in Spokane. And obviously, each person's healthcare is very specific and very different, but it just, in general, cost of living is cheaper over here, and that's going to include everything, including healthcare. So the miscellaneous goods and services, let's take a look at this one next. The milk is a little bit cheaper, not a whole lot. The bread's a little bit cheaper, about 5%. I think the most important part is that the coffee is cheaper over here. I wouldn't say it's because the coffee is any worse or any better in Seattle, but the coffee price point is certainly something I always look for because I love coffee. And in a future video, I plan to do some of the best coffee shops here in Spokane. So definitely be on the lookout for that. All right. The next city we're going to look at in comparison to Spokane is Dallas, Texas. And I think this is a good one because a lot of people think that all West Coast towns are the same in regards to expense. And I just want to show that that's not quite the case, and how people that are moving to Texas because the cost of living is cheaper, and maybe they just don't know that the cost of living in Spokane would be comparable, especially for those that live on the west coast of Washington or even California and Oregon. So let's take a look at how it stacks up. It looks like Spokane is actually 1% lower for the cost of living if you were to compare it to Dallas, and let's see how that breaks down. All right, so we'll go to the housing. It looks like the home prices in Spokane and Dallas are honestly pretty much the same. They are only 1.73% different. Spokane is a little bit more expensive. The apartments in Spokane are a little bit cheaper, about 30%. So I would not even actually equate that to being a little bit. I would say that's quite a bit cheaper. 30% is for sure. And it looks like the energy is cheaper, and your phone bill will be a little bit cheaper here in Spokane. So shocker there, $7 whole. Transportation, this one's pretty expected. The gas in Texas is cheaper for sure. And I assume this is all throughout Texas, but like we saw earlier, the gas is cheaper in Spokane than it is on the west side of the state, and I'm sure it's much cheaper than places in California. So can't beat you on that one, but I would have to say Spokane specifically, you're not doing as much driving. Having lived in Texas and been to Dallas, it's a huge state, and they also have things spaced out quite a bit. So this might not be something that you'd be thinking about as much when you're living in Spokane, because everything is pretty close, and a lot of people consider it's far away if it's more than 15 minutes away, but you're not spending a lot of time on the freeway, and you're mainly staying pretty close to where you live, unless you prefer to go out and do other things. But all your necessities aren't too far away, and that is one of the main benefits, I would say. So it is 33% higher in Dallas, or than Dallas, for the cost of gas, but you probably aren't using as much. And if you are, it's because you're going outside of the city to probably do some kind of adventuring, or you're headed over to the other side of the state. So that is definitely something to think about. The healthcare is only a little bit higher here in Spokane, and it looks like they go back and forth kind of all over the place. So like I said earlier, this is really dependent on you and your specific needs. All right, so miscellaneous goods and services. Dang, looks like I might need to move to Dallas because the coffee is cheaper. I'm just kidding. But something to think about is it looks like in general things are a little bit cheaper in Dallas. The only thing different would be the shampoo, but that's only showing about 1 cent difference. So, but your milk, your bread, your coffee is probably going to be a little bit cheaper in Dallas, but you also have to deal with 100-degree heat for, the entire year. All right, the next city we're going to take a look at in comparison to Spokane is Los Angeles, Long Beach, California area. This one actually matches up pretty close to Seattle, which I've heard. So I used to be a realtor on the west side of the state as well. And a lot of people kind of mentioned that when they were visiting and buying houses up in Washington, is they typically had to buy on the outskirts if they wanted to actually get that cheaper cost of living. But with that being said, cost of living is significantly cheaper in Spokane in comparison to Los Angeles, Long Beach area. Let's take a look at how exactly that breaks down, because I think it's going to be a little bit different than Seattle. So it looks like cost of living is mainly to do with housing, 61% lower, which is huge. The average home price in Los Angeles is $1.2 million. Like I said, in Spokane is about $480,000. The rent is pretty comparable to what we saw in Seattle as well. And the energy is cheaper over here. Not super surprising, but just something to think about. Looks like the phone bills are a little bit more expensive in Spokane. A little shocker there. But in general, obviously what you could buy for $1.2 million if you're looking to move out of the California area in Spokane is, you could buy in any neighborhood in Spokane. It just depends on the size of the home at that point, but that really puts you in the entire market of Spokane. You could even potentially get a place on the lake out in Liberty Lake or on the river. There's just a lot you could do with that price point in Spokane. So something to think about is kind of how enjoyable your life would be in a spot on a lake or on a river, or maybe, with a little space on some acreage. And that is something that Spokane has that is super specific to Spokane and not just all of Washington. All of Washington, if you are on the other side of the state, you're gonna end up with some really, really expensive homes if you want anything with privacy that is on that more $1.2 million range. It's not going to be there. So something to think about. Transportation, gas is a little bit cheaper in Spokane, but not too much. This is, like I said, pretty comparable to the Seattle area. And healthcare is a little bit higher. Like I said, super specific, but in general, it looks like the healthcare is actually pretty close to the same. These kind of go up and down a little bit. Each of them has their own higher and lower cost. And then the miscellaneous goods and services, most importantly, we're looking at coffee, and the coffee in Spokane is cheaper. So looks like I will not be moving to Los Angeles, but just kidding. In general, it looks like it's a little bit lower, and I would say if you broke this out into a grocery trip, it could substantially change. If you spend $100, it'd be $14 cheaper in Spokane to get your groceries. So just something to think about. All right, the next one we're going to take a look at is a place in Montana, specifically Missoula, Montana. I chose this one because I think it's important to take a look at the cost of living in regards to Spokane and a place in Montana, because most people think moving to Montana, they're going to get out in the country, they're going to have a slower pace of life and all this kind of great stuff, and it's going to be significantly cheaper to live there. And I just want to do this little comparison because I think it can be a misconception in a lot of ways, because in regards to a place like Spokane. So let's take a look. It is 1% higher to live in Spokane in regards of cost of living. So $981 different if you're making $70,000 a year, and that's not much. So let's take a look at how that all breaks down. So looks like the cost of living for housing is actually a little bit cheaper in Spokane, but that mainly has to do with rent and energy and phone, and less to do with the price of the house, because it looks like it's about $15,000 more to live or to buy a house in Spokane. And as we talked about earlier, that can vary quite a bit in the Spokane market, just in regards to how different and how many different neighborhoods and size of homes that's included within the Spokane market. So on to the next, transportation. It looks like gas is significantly higher in Spokane, and this is no shocker. The gas in Washington is generally more expensive than a lot of places, but like I said earlier, you're typically not traveling as much miles wise. So you can more than likely find a place to live near where you work, and that is also conveniently near grocery stores and all those other needs that you have. So you might not actually be spending a ton on gas unless you're, like I said earlier, going around town and really getting outside the city and maybe enjoying some of the great outdoors. But you might not actually see that much of a difference, that big 20% change. So healthcare is a little bit more expensive, and take a look at that. Like I said earlier, super specific to your needs and how that all works into your life, but they are pretty comparable. It's only 6% different. It looks like the goods and services match up exactly, which is the shocker, but the coffee is cheaper. So that's something to think about if you love coffee. Maybe you need to move to Montana. I'm just kidding. Come on over to Spokane. We have much better coffee shops, I'm sure. All right, the next one we're going to take a look at is a place in Idaho. It's going to be Boise, Idaho. And it looks like the cost of living in Spokane is 3% less than Boise. So let's take a look and see how that breaks down. All right, looks like the big one is going to be the housing cost. with home prices in Boise coming in closer to that 520 mark. And as we said earlier, 480 in Spokane. The apartment rent, actually, this is the closest that we've seen so far, and still significantly cheaper in Spokane. I would assume because of Boise State that you have a lot of renters based on that college kind of renting population. But with that being said, Spokane does have Gonzaga and Eastern, as well as a couple community colleges that, I guess we shouldn't discount when we're thinking about that. So looks like the energy is a little bit more expensive in Washington and compared to Idaho, as expected, and the phone bill as well. So transportation, looks like the gas is quite a bit cheaper in Boise than Spokane, and the healthcare looks to be 10% more expensive in Spokane. So looks like the part that is biggest for Spokane is the housing costs, and looks like maybe the miscellaneous goods and services only about 6% different though. If we look at the coffee, like I always like to do, looks like Boise's cheaper, so I may have to make some changes. I'm just kidding. All right, the last one we're going to take a look at is Portland, Oregon. Portland, in regards to Spokane, is only about 5.5 hours, 6 hours away, depending on what part you're going to and what part of Spokane you're leaving from. And it looks like the cost of living in Spokane in comparison to Portland is about 19% lower. I assume this is going to mainly be the housing costs. I do have some family that lives in the Portland area, and I know that the housing costs there can be a little bit higher. So let's see if I am correct. Well, yeah, looks like right on the money there. Housing costs 39% lower here in Spokane, Washington. If you're wanting to buy a house in Portland, it's about $700,000 and only about $480 in Spokane, and that's quite a big difference. That's huge difference, nearly $220,000. So apartments about $1,200 cheaper, so you could rent 2 apartments here for the price of 1 in Portland. The energy is a little bit cheaper. It looks like the phone bill is a little more expensive in Washington and in the Spokane area. So transportation, gas prices are about the same. Oregon and Washington generally have that kind of the same in regards to that. So a little bit cheaper in Portland, but not much. Healthcare is a little bit more expensive in Spokane as well, but only 2%. So really comparable, and definitely something to think about. Looks like the miscellaneous goods and services, it is about 6% lower in Spokane, and the coffee is cheaper. So I'm good to go here. And it looks like basically everything's cheaper here in Spokane in regards to groceries. So definitely something to think about. 6% isn't a ton, but does add up, over the month in regards to every time you go to the grocery store and how much that will add up to. If you spend $1,000 in groceries that month, it's going to be $60 cheaper. So I think my math is correct there. Let me know if you think it's wrong. Go ahead and let me know in the comments. But in general, the cost of living in Spokane is really affordable compared to most places throughout the United States in regards to bigger cities. Obviously, I know there's smaller cities that have a cheaper cost of living and things like that. But Spokane specifically, with all that it has to offer in regards to the kind of city feel, the things you like to do in a city, as well as the outdoors, I don't think there's a lot of cities that can match up to it in regards to cost of living. So like I said, we've taken a look at some spots all throughout the United States, and I personally will always stand by Spokane is the best place to live, and I'm super thankful to be living here.